Buonasera, buonasera a tutti.
Good evening to everyone. I am glad to be the master of ceremony for this closing ceremony of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, which took place today and yesterday and the day before. At the table with me, there are the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Ms. Emanuela Claudia Del Re, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Ms. Mami Mizutori, the Head of Civil Protection Department, Mr. Angelo Borrelli, the Head of the EFDRR European Office, Paola Albrito, the representative of Disaster Risk Reduction European Voluntary Humanitarian Corps, DG ECHO, Ms. Nacira Boulehouat, and the representative for the Council of Europe, Mr. Gianluca Silvestrini. It is a great pleasure for me to be the master of ceremony at this event that was extraordinarily important for all of us. First of all, I'd like to leave the floor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Ms. Emanuela Claudia Del Re, for the adoption of the final document of this forum, the Declaration of Rome. Ms. Del Re, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Miozzo. I'd like to thank all of you, and I am glad to read this declaration.
All of you, and I'm actually very happy to read this Rome Declaration. It will be a long reading, but I think it's full of content, and obviously this makes it very important and interesting. Rome Declaration of Stakeholders, Securing Europe's Prosperity, Reducing Risk of Disasters. We, the head of the national delegations and practitioners responsible for disaster risk reduction in Europe, having met in Rome, Italy, from the 21st to the 23rd of November 2018 at the 2018 European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, Number one, express gratitude and appreciation to the Government of Italy for its warm hospitality in hosting the European Forum and leadership in disaster risk reduction. Number two, express deep concern at the growing frequency and intensity of extreme weather and climate-related events and continuing impact of disasters in the region, resulting in unacceptable loss of human lives and livelihood, displacement of people, and environmental and economic damages, including to critical infrastructure and cultural heritage. Number three, acknowledge that economic losses due to disasters pose a serious challenge to the sustainability, growth, and prosperity of the European region. Number four, recognize the devastating and often life-changing impact that all forms of disaster may have on their victims, including the crucial need to ensure adequate compensation for losses. Number five, underline that disasters disproportionately affect specific groups of people, including women, children, and youth, persons with disabilities, as well as migrants and forcibly displaced persons. Number six, consider that climate and disaster risks are two sides of the same coin, calling for an integrated approach to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction actions. Number seven, stress the need to comprehensively address significant and increasingly complex threats posed by diverse man-made and technological risks, to address factors such as poor or insufficient regulation, implementation of standards, of governance mechanisms, and to incentivize multi-hazard approaches which can decrease risk and disaster impacts. Number eight, highlight the need to focus on underlying, interconnected and evolving risk factors such as aging and interdependent infrastructure, impacts on capital markets and their volatility, urbanization, gender and age, inequality and displacement. Number 9, recognize the importance of ensuring coherence among global frameworks such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, the new Urban Agenda, as well as relevant European Union legislation and other resilience initiatives. Number 10, renew our commitment to ensure continuity of the work in disaster risk reduction, built on the 2015-2020 European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction roadmap implementation, and recognize the role of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction in this regard. Call on all governments and stakeholders to, number 11, welcome the vital role played by stakeholder groups as enablers, partnering with governments and communities in the implementation of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction roadmap at regional, national and local levels, including the importance of innovative multi-sectoral partnership. 12. Urgently accelerate actions for developing and implementing national and local strategies on disaster risk reduction, thereby meeting targets of the Sendai framework by 2020. 13. Commit to translating greater coherence and effective enforcement of global frameworks into appropriate policy and practice to achieve resilience at all levels and across all sectors, including through the strengthening of governance arrangement and the provision of practical guidance to ensure effective and efficient management of disaster risk. Number 14, support a more systematic integration of the risks of climate change into disaster risk reduction, prevention, preparedness, response, recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction actions, including through engagement with relevant institutions. Explore innovative decision-making support tools to help stress test current systems against realistic climate impact scenarios. Number 15, recognize the value and benefits of ecosystem services and nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction. Number 16, promote risk-sensitive public and private investments for building disaster resilience, making full use of the opportunity of ongoing wider developments around sustainable finance. Convene a dedicated financial inquiry on unlocking disaster resilience investments. 17, implement Build Back Better policies, improve early warning and disaster communication systems, as well as urban and land use planning as a means to mitigate future disaster impacts and break any cycle of recurring events. Number 18, commit to greater accountability and improved governance, including through encouraging a broad societal and political dialogue, systematically collecting and recording disaster damage, losses and people affected, conducting and sharing risk assessments and analysis to inform national and local strategies, and establishing relevant monitoring baselines. Number 19, make full use of the Sendai Framework Monitor to identify trends, assess progress and draw lessons in achieving global and national targets through disaggregated data at all levels. Number 20, ensure the use of disaster risk assessment as a prerequisite for infrastructure investment with time horizons commensurate to their life cycles, as well as complementary measures to incentivize resilience investments. Number 21, dedicate specific attention to the safeguarding of tangible and intangible cultural heritage, especially in focusing efforts on the applications of new technologies to understand risks and manage disasters, including its role in supporting community engagement. Number 22, ensure improved inclusion of science, data and technology in and utilization of evidence-based decisions and risk-informed policies through systematic engagement of all relevant stakeholders, such as scientific and academic communities, basic service providers, and public authorities in national and local platforms for disaster risk reduction and relevant global governance mechanisms. Number 23, facilitate the relationship with the civil society in implementing the Sendai framework, recognizing their critical role in supporting a people-centered, all-of-society approach, ensuring the protection of basic human rights, recognizing the importance of risks linked to animals, and in grounding the Sendai framework at the community level. Number 24, ensure an inclusive approach to disaster risk reduction by drawing attention to gender-neutral policies and practices, including the integration of vulnerable groups such as, inter alia, people with disabilities, migrants, forcibly displaced persons, children and youth, elderly and isolated people in disaster risk reduction policies, strategies, and practices. Adopted on the 23rd of November 2018 in Rome, Italy.
Grazie onorevole Del Re per aver
Thank you, Ms. Del Re, for sharing with us this important declaration. It is an honor for me to leave the floor to the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Ms. Mami Mizutori. You have the floor.
Your Excellency, Dr. Emanuela Claudia Del Re, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, honorable representatives, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. These have been a very memorable few days in Rome. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte made a little bit of history this week in a city that has an awful lot of history. He became the first Prime Minister in Europe to open a European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction. His presence, his words, and the actions his government is taking to reduce disaster risk speak volumes for the level of political commitment there is in Italy towards achieving the targets laid out in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. I thank him most sincerely for his participation, and also his Deputy Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, Dr. Edoardo Risi, with whom I had the pleasure of co-chairing yesterday's high-level roundtable, which I will return on in my remarks. I would also like to thank Mr. Carlo Lobreggia, Vice President of Confindustria, not only for his participation in the opening ceremony, but for hosting us in the splendid surroundings of Confindustria's head office. Another outstanding feature of this conference has been the excellent work of our co-organizer, Italy's Department of Civil Protection, especially the head of the agency, Dr. Angelo Borrelli, his staff, and the many volunteers who have been working so hard to make this a successful event. I would like to ask you to please join me in giving them all a big round of applause. Now, I know that Rome was not built in a day, but neither was the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. It took 3 years of consultations to agree on the final document adopted in March 2015. And it has taken another 3 years to arrive at the point earlier this year when we could launch the Sendai Framework Monitor with agreed-upon indicators for measuring the 7 targets designed to save lives and reduce disaster losses overall. I feel we are now on the verge of a major breakthrough when it comes to reaching the critical mass required to pass from commitment to action, from dreams to reality. I'm convinced more than ever, from what I have seen and heard here over the last 3 days, that Europe is leading the change on action to reduce disaster risk and to bring down loss of life, numbers of affected people, and economic losses. This is in the context of a new reality where no country in Europe is spared from the consequences of disasters. Of the 55 countries covered by the Europe and Central Asia region, we learned this week that 62% are using the Sendai Framework Monitor, and within the EU, the figure is 72%. This is very encouraging, and at the same time, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction is taking on board your feedback about the challenges that lie ahead, including around sharing data on economic losses and damage to critical infrastructure, which may be sensitive in some jurisdictions. However, as a number of you have pointed out in the session on the Sendai Framework Monitor, collecting this data provides the necessary hard metrics to argue for measures focused on economic resilience in a region which had 3 countries in the top 10 worldwide last year for economic losses. This data is also useful in making the argument for sustainable finance and integrating disaster risk into financial decision-making and investment flows. Urban challenges and opportunities were also discussed during this week. The City of Paris presented the key challenges facing its resilience unit, and these included inequality and social cohesion, climate change, river floods, air pollution, and territorial governance. Many cities in Europe, indeed, are rising to these challenges and demonstrating that solving such problems is as much about communication and raising public awareness as it is about adapting and changing the way we do urban development. I was pleased also to be present at the ceremony last night, which saw 5 new members, including 4 from Italy, join our Making Cities Resilient campaign, which supports cities and towns across the world in building resilience. A highlight for me yesterday was to experience with Prime Minister Conte what it's like to endure the shaking of a 6.3 earthquake, such as the one which destroyed much of the Italian city of L'Aquila and killed almost 300 people in 2016. Earthquake risk is a major threat to Italy and other countries in Europe. And last night, we recognized this when we presented the Damien Sermian Award to John Schneider, the Secretary General of the GEM Foundation. GEM's work over the last 10 years on the global earthquake model has helped governments and communities in over 150 countries to assess seismic risk and take necessary action to protect lives and property. While I was co-chairing yesterday's roundtable with Minister Issi, I was fascinated to hear representatives from so many countries talking about new and emerging risks, many linked to concerns about technology, including the possibility of technological hazards and the impact of cyber attacks. There was also a case cited where fake news about seismic alerts threatened to undermine efforts to improve public understanding of earthquake risk. There have been many commemorations around the world this year of the 1918 flu pandemic, which took millions of lives here in Europe. The continuing pandemic threat and the need for preparedness was also discussed. Europe is facing many challenges from climate change, including rising seas, extreme weather variability, water stress, and new vector-borne diseases and infections that come with a warming climate. All these concerns underline the importance of an inclusive approach to a disaster risk reduction, one which crosses over barriers which can divide government departments or groups in society. In particular, when it comes to technological, environmental, and biological hazards, new areas of focus included in the Sendai framework, we need to engage actively with the science and technology communities. The European Science and Technology Advisory Group is making an important contribution to this. This is the last of the regional platforms to take place before we reconvene at the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in May next year in Geneva. The outcome from this European forum will feed into the discussions at that gathering, which will give us a global overview for the first time of the progress being made in reporting disaster losses and efforts to reduce them as per the Sendai Framework's targets. The Rome Declaration, which has been adopted today, will nurture the debate at the global platform and also inform our office's contribution to important milestone events on the Sustainable Development Calendar over the next 12 months. These include the COP Climate Change Conference, the high-level political forums review of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Secretary General's Climate Summit. The message from the stakeholder groups come across loud and clear. Some of these messages are echoed by other regions, and some are unique in the emphasis which Europe places on them, notably the need to address aging infrastructure, protect the region's antiquities and rich cultural heritage, and encourage a well-developed financial system to factor disaster risk into its business models. The Rome Declaration is a further demonstration that the disaster risk reduction community is united on key issues such as coherence across implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change and the SDGs. Europe is also strong on the need for inclusion, gender equality, and an all-of-society approach which leaves no one out when it comes to building society's resilience to disasters. And that includes the poor, migrants, and those challenged by mobility, and others who are often overlooked in potential disaster zones. Rome may be the eternal city, but the Sendai Framework expires in 2030, and we have a lot to do, not least completing the work of putting in place national and local strategies for disaster risk reduction by 2020. I would like to close by thanking once more the Prime Minister, his government, the staff and volunteers of the Department of Civil Protection for making this such a successful event. I hope to see many of you again at the Global Platform in Geneva. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you, Ms. Mizutori, for your contribution. It is a pleasure for me now to call to the podium the representative of the General Direction for Civil Protection, Humanitarian Aid of the European Union. Nacira Boulehouat, you have the floor. I'd like to ask to Nacira Boulehouat her thoughts, the thoughts of the European Union on this forum, and some indications how the European Union sees the idea of strengthening the agenda for the disaster risk reduction in the Sendai framework. Thank you. You have the floor.
Good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to thank warmly you, Special Representative, and also all your team in UNSDR for the excellent work in conducting this forum and taking us through a variety or a multitude of subjects which are key to advancing the agenda for disaster risk reduction in Europe. We would like also to thank warmly the government of Italy and Civil Protection in particular for their engagement to advance also this cause of DRR, to showcase their engagement at the European Union level. This we know, I can talk by experience, but also as demonstrated over the 3 days, your strong commitment at global level. We are extremely grateful for that. The European Union, the European Commission is committed to show practical political and financial support to DRR, and we are covering a lot of activities in this area to support the implementation of the Sendai framework. We would like to express our great satisfaction to have 3 days discussion at a in a multi-stakeholder format, which is exactly what the Sendai framework wants us to do. And it is a success. This is what we have got, so congratulations. As European Commission, we are determined to continue our engagement across different union policies which cover for disaster risk reduction. There are many, and our job is to make sure that those policies become now for good risk-informed. It covers civil protection, but also climate adaptation, our policy on research, the Union policy on innovation, on science, on health, on culture, on education, on industry, and many others, and even lately on finance and sustainable finance, which is one of the last pieces we brought to our community, European community agenda on the DRR. So, practical support, because we want to see collectively in the Union progress and work continue in terms of designing the DRR strategies, which is one of the next deliverable in the near future that we are expecting under the Sendai framework. For that, we invest a lot of work in terms of supporting our member states to collect data, to report on losses, to understand better the risks, to make solid and accurate risk assessments, to assess the capabilities of member states to address those risks. This is what we are pushing and pursuing through union policies and legislation. We invest a lot of effort to expand the knowledge base on disaster risk reduction. This is on offer for the European Union, but it's also exposed there for anyone through our knowledge center to be able to access the latest information on science. We feel very, very strongly about bringing together policymakers, science, practitioners, exactly as we are here today, or we have been for 3 days, because this is a key element for the success of DRR. And we feel strongly also about the engagement of all actors, wherever they come from, public also actors, but private. And we do see that there is still a lot of ground which needs to be covered in terms of our engagement or the engagement of the private sector in this endeavor. Throughout these 3 days, we really think that we have covered a lot of ground, and we are very grateful for seeing how much efforts and how much dedication is demonstrated for so many stakeholders. But we are also happy to see that these discussions tells us also how much we still need to do in order to meet all the targets that are covered by the Sendai framework. The European Commission is determined to continue building the capacity inside the Union so that we continue working on all these issues. But it is also a global player, and we do expand exactly what we are doing inside the EU. We do project it outside the EU. Our first priority as European Union is our neighbors, and we have plenty of capacity building and mutual learning and experience sharing with our closest neighbors represented here in this forum. And we do the same also with the neighbors of our neighbors, and we are happy that they have joined the European Forum for the first time ever. So with all these commitments inside the EU, but also the projection that we want to provide outside the Union, we think and we want to give you the assurance to the next milestone in DRR, which is the preparation of the Global Forum. Dear Mr. Special Representative, please be assured that the European Commission is going to support you in whichever form is needed in order to make the next Global Forum a success. Be reassured of our commitment and that we are going to step up everything that is already ongoing in the different areas of DRR, because there is, as for the issues of climate change, a sense of urgency to deliver results and practical action in this area. Thank you.
Grazie, dottoressa Boulehouat.
Thank you, Nacira. Thank you for these reassuring words from the European Union and a General Directorate which is so committed in this field. I now leave the floor to the representative of the Council of Europe, Mr. Gianluca Silvestrini, which will share with us his impression and the impressions of the the Council of Europe on this forum and what we still need to do.
Thank you very much, Director General and Excellency, dear colleagues and dear participants. I have to say, first of all, that it has been a great pleasure for me to participate in the forum as an opportunity to learn. This is, I think, is a key word, to learn. I learn a lot from the interesting presentation and from the debates, and also from the innovative proposals. It is, of course, a good opportunity also to meet colleagues and friends, but also to meet new people, which allow to start possible collaboration and possible new partnerships. I have to say that my pockets are full of business cards, and I hope yours too. And this is also one of the aims of this forum, networking. As you know, a multi-stakeholder and multidisciplinary approach is fundamental in disaster risk reduction. And this inclusive approach is implemented since the start of the preparation of this European Forum by setting up the organizing teams for each plenary and technical session. I think it's worth to recall this approach. A balanced representation is ensured by giving an opportunity to all stakeholders. Among you, we have representatives from governments, academia, NGOs, private sector, paying attention to geographical and gender balance. And I would say that the number and the diversity of participants, as well as their active contribution to the session during these 3 days, are a good indicator of the success of this important event. Now, from the session and also by discussing with the participants, I have noted many interesting ideas for possible future initiative, and I want to mention only some of them. Don't worry, it's not my intention to make a summary of the forum, but also to think about the future. No? While I was talking to you and listening, I said, what could be done next together with our partners? In the future event, maybe discussing with some participants, we should try to ensure the participation of more politicians, parliamentarians, and decision makers. We know that is not easy. The investment in prevention and preparedness is a long-term process, much longer than the mandate of a politician. But I believe that we should discuss this with our UN and EU partners. And of course, we would need to work with the member states, so we will need your support. The second key word that I heard in many sessions is communication. Communication is very important at different levels. And as you know, it should be adapted according to the target audience. At the Council of Europe, we have developed guidance on communicating climate change and biodiversity to politicians. You may smile about that, but depend on to whom you are talking. You have to adapt your communication, and also when you talk to citizens. I always say that if you are able to explain to your children what you're doing and they do not raise the question, is a good indicator that you are very clear about your communication. Another key word is cooperation at the international level was also mentioned to promote good practices, local and national experiences through both multilateral and cross-border cooperation. Private sector, yes, I want to echo what my colleague Nacira has just mentioned. I think the collaboration with NGOs and civil society organizations have improved a lot in the recent years. I had the chance to speak with one of the representatives of the private sector, and I think we all agree that there is still a lot of potential for development with the private sector. And the Council of Europe is investigating many opportunities for that. The role of media was not mentioned in this forum, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's good to food for thought for the future, because we, as the Council of Europe, we are supporting initiatives on the role of media to raise the awareness of authorities and politicians before a disaster occurs and not only after. How? For example, by emphasizing the local knowledge. Local communities know their territory and their risk, but their knowledge is not always taken into account in the emergency plan. So we would like to support some pilot project in Italy following an event that we organized in Ravello, where we have a specialized center dealing with protection of cultural heritage. This pilot project will be developed in the Costiera Amalfitana and in the Liguria region on this issue, to protect cultural landscape for the prevention of natural disasters. This is a very comprehensive approach involving education at school, socioeconomic development, what we have to do for the abandonment of the countryside, but also involving local media. Now, I would like to talk about the organization that I represent here, the role of the Council of Europe in the engagement in this forum. As you know, the Council of Europe is a pan-European organization. We have 47 member states, and we promote human rights, democratic participation, democratic governance, ensuring that no one is left behind. The European and Mediterranean Major Hazards Agreement, for which I'm responsible for, is engaged in transforming the commitment of governments and stakeholders made in Sendai into local and national action. The Major Hazard Agreement aims to support the outcomes of the forum and the implementation of the Sendai framework through 4 main priorities in the field of disaster risk reduction. The first one is using scientific and technological knowledge to better assess evolving risk and adapt accordingly the resilience strategies. This is a goal that we intend to achieve with our network of 25 specialized centers focusing on emerging risk and knowledge-based policy. The role of the Council of Europe, of course, is political. We are a political organization. So what we do, we transform the results of scientific work in recommendation, what we call soft law. They are not legal binding instruments like our conventions, and also guidelines, good practices, which are addressed to member states as a source of inspiration for their national and policy strategies. The second priority is developing cooperation among all decision makers to better define authorities' role in disaster risk reduction. And we aim to identify good governance practices in the prevention and management of natural catastrophes and cross-border cooperation. So the governance is very important in relation to the results of the scientific work. And as you know, there is still a lot to do. Most of the time the information is there. You have a scientific network, academia, doing a lot of work, which unfortunately is not always used by the decision makers to prevent a natural disaster. So this, I think, is a gap that was mentioned also in the Global Forum in Cancun, in Mexico, and in Istanbul last year. And again, is a topic that I think we should address in the future. The third priority of the Council of Europe agreement is promoting risk culture among the population. During the session, we spoke a lot about the importance to not only to inform the population, but also to foster active participation of the population in disaster risk reduction, which is our fourth priority. So promoting risk culture, but also involve citizens in disaster risk reduction. How we do that? We are supporting the preparation of teaching manuals, educational guidelines, our awareness-raising campaign, and investing in social media and digital communication. This is very important. We develop a different smartphone app to inform and to involve the population and also vulnerable groups in the management of major hazards. We produce guidelines and recommendations for more inclusive policies and programs. I also would like to mention another focus of the Council of Europe and of the Europa Major Hazard Agreements. We are focusing on integrating disaster risk reduction in other areas. I mentioned this morning the marginal and special groups, vulnerable groups, and this is very important because it's related to the human rights approach, cultural heritage, and community-based approach, climate change. We would like to work more with other organizations on environmental resilience, and also, of course, the Council of Europe is committed to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. So, like my partners, we would like to just express our support. The Council of Europe is ready to stand and to support the organization of the next forum also through the European and Mediterranean Major Hazard Agreement, also through the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Europe Development Bank. To conclude, I would like to thank, of course, the Italian authorities and the Italian Civil Protection for the warm welcome and the perfect organization of the forum, and of course, our partner, UNHCR and you. And thank you, all of you, for your support. It has been a great pleasure to have the chance to discuss with not all of you, but at least most of you. Thank you very much.
Grazie Gianluca.
Thank you, Gianluca. Now we have, it is a great pleasure for me to give the floor to Mr. Borrelli, the head of the Civil Protection. Dear delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am glad to take the floor in the final session just to thank you all on behalf of the national system and the civil protection, which is responsible for all activities aimed at supporting and assisting citizens, cultural heritage, and other stakeholders facing catastrophes and disasters in the stage of help and prevention of crisis. The discussions we've had in these 2 days represent the scenario of our daily life activities. We've learned, disaster by disaster, how important and necessary it is to be prepared to face any kind of crisis. For years, we've been working with other institutions within the country and the scientific community to reduce the time dedicated to decision-making progress in times of emergency. Our system was built to be ready to act and react on real time as soon as a disaster or an extreme phenomenon happens. Civil protection will cooperate and urges all the government stakeholders to be fast in the decision-making process, because we don't have so much time due to the hazards and the risks we have identified. We operated in the past learning to divide real time of emergency from the time available to governments, local administrations, regional authorities to carry out structural interventions for risk reduction. This second time has become much shorter, and now it almost corresponds to the real time needed to face disasters. For these reasons, we are involved in all the projects of our government aimed at protecting, supporting citizens from natural and anthropic risks, keeping into account the 9 conditions into which we are operating, from carrying out structural programs for risk reduction. Yesterday, also, our president of the Council of Ministers, Mr. Conte, was mentioning them, to the platform of alarm and weather alert, universities and research institutions to share the culture of civil protection in school and the engagement of youth in the civil service. We also want to cooperate with entrepreneurs and Confindustria. We thank Confindustria because for hosting us in these 2 days. And so I thank Mr. Carlo Robiglio, the president of Confindustria. We are convinced that our coordination ability to work effectively and efficiently with government and with people coming from different backgrounds, and this is useful from many points of view. We need to have a multidisciplinary approach. We need to face complexity without taking shortcuts or simplifying things. Cooperation among our countries and our institutions is fundamental and is now necessary. And this is not only from a national point of view, but also from an international point of view, to give continuity to our perspective of growth and development. The world has become more complicated, so we shall probably not expect to reach situations that were present in the past. We need to be used to consider as normal the conditions created from the main factors that come from the impacts of existing risks. This led me to consider this challenge as not impossible, but as a situation that if we work constantly for the interest of the citizens, and especially younger generations, we can be successful. I will close my intervention by sharing with you our commitment and our interest for any kind of activity of exchange of information with all other stakeholders that around the world are committed on these topics that we have recognized today as necessary and important. So thank you all for your contributions, and please allow me to thank my colleague, my cooperators, my collaborators, and whoever has worked so that the Rome Forum was successful. So see you in Geneva. Thank you all.
Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Borrelli. Thank you, Angelo. And now it is a great pleasure to leave the floor and the podium to a friend of mine, Miss Paola Albrito. She is chief the Regional Office for Europe and for UNISDR. Paola, you have the floor.
I know that at this time I need to be extremely succinct, so I will put aside my speech and I will just share with you a few considerations that have not yet been picked up by my colleagues. As has been already mentioned, the fact that Italy has shown a very strong political leadership. And on this, I really would like to reiterate the importance. In a moment in which Europe is looking at so many challenges, the importance of having our leaders with us in this agenda is extremely precious. So thank you very much to Italy in these regards. I think we have joined forces with over 800 participants, we said so, in particular joining forces with Central Asia and South Caucasus. This is extremely precious. But also I would like to put emphasis on something that was already mentioned by Council of Europe, which is actually the capacity not only to come and sit in this room and talk to each other, but to go through the process of the preparation. So your insights has been of extreme value, and this is why we had such a rich agenda. I will not stop in looking at the challenges, but I will reflect on one important consideration. Europe does have a lot of innovative ideas and is capable of putting it into practice. We were together in Istanbul last year, and we were discussing the issue of economic challenges. What I've heard in these last 3 days in terms of innovative idea to address the challenges related to financial disclosure and opportunity to channel funds in terms of disaster risk reduction, building the partnership in order to ensure that we're going to reduce the economic losses has been of extreme interest to all of us, really bringing Europe ahead in facing these sort of challenges. But I said I was going to be brief, and so I will. I really would like to thank very much, of course, Italy and the team, because we are friends, so it is an extremely close partnership. Council of Europe, the European Union, European Commission, always with us as part of the Secretariat of the EFDRR, and my team. The Europe team has done a tremendous work during these days and in the past year in preparing this event. My last word is related to human engagement. Something that really strikes me when I come and meet with all of you is the understanding of the impact of disasters and how much you welcome and put into practices value and principle that are so key in order to build resilience to disasters. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Paola. Really, thank you for your kind words. I'd like now to almost conclude, leaving the floor to the representative of the Federal Civil Protection Office of Switzerland, Mr. Stefan Brem, that is coming here and will talk about the Global Platform of 2019.
Capo della tavola.
Thank you, Chair.
It is delayed, so I'm even more resilient buffer between you and the beautiful city of Rome. So bear with me for a moment. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. For Switzerland and also in my personal capacity, it is an honor to be part of this closing ceremony. During the last 3 days, we have discussed many topics that are of central importance of Europe and the world beyond. As we have heard, Italy, for instance, has recently suffered the impacts of severe storms, heavy rainfalls and debris flows from Alto Adige to Sicily. In addition to the tragic loss of life, there have been transportation interruptions as well as power and telecommunication outages. These events stress the importance of all disaster risk reduction measures in a comprehensive way. In an alpine country, Switzerland has to deal with similar hazards and disasters. Flooding, avalanches and debris flow put people and critical infrastructure in harm's way. But who would have thought that the largest earthquake north of the Alps took place in Switzerland and destroyed the medieval city of Basel? Today a vibrant city of culture, finance, chemical industry and the access to the North Sea. Talking about chemical industry, who still remembers the devastating fire at the chemical facility near Basel, which severely impacted the natural habitat of the Rhine River from the Swiss borders to the Netherlands? Who would have thought of Switzerland as the location where the most severe nuclear meltdown took place in Western Europe? Or where terrorist activities took place in Zurich or on Swiss airplanes in the 70s? Who would have thought that Switzerland has experienced a total outage of its usually very accurate rail transportation system and as the origin, and I'm still sorry for that, of the total power outage in Italy in September 2003. These events show the crucial importance of an all-hazard and all-measure, as well as a whole-of-society approach. Since then, the federal government of Switzerland has published a national disaster risk report covering 33 risks related to natural, technical, and societal hazards, has supported 23 of its 26 cantons at the subnational level with their risk assessment, approved national strategies on civil protection and civil defense in 2012, on critical infrastructure protection in 2012 and 2017, and most recently on the management of risks from natural hazards just this fall. Last month, Switzerland has launched an updated app called Alert Swiss that allows the cantonal and the federal authorities to provide information to the public on how to prepare for and also how to react in an emergency, as well as to warn and alert it, including the more vulnerable members of the population. And just this Wednesday, the Federal Council, our cabinet, has started a parliamentary consultation process of the revised federal law on civil protection and civil defense, as well as the acquisition credit to procure highly redundant and secured broadband communication system and a situational picture for disaster risk management authorities on the national and subnational level, as well as operators of critical infrastructure. All these activities aim at decreasing the resilience of Switzerland and further reduce its risk profile. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to the global DRR agenda. 3 years have passed since the Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction was endorsed by the UN General Assembly, the same year that the Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Climate Agreement were adopted. In May next year, the global DRR community shall unite, this time in Geneva, as was mentioned before, for a particularly important edition of the global platform, 15 months after the launch of the Sendai Monitor process and 1 year before the deadline for Target E. Switzerland is delighted to host and co-chair next year's global platform in Geneva, the home of the International Committee of Red Cross and many international organizations, also in the broader area of DRR, humanitarian aid and climate change. We not only strongly believe in the merits of DRR, but we are also convinced that an integrative disaster risk management approach is of vital importance in achieving the other landmark agreements of 2015, and thereby contributing to the overall goal of the international community has set for 2030, namely to achieve comprehensive, inclusive and sustainable development. Consider, for example, the Paris Agreement. The role of DRR for climate action is obvious. We cannot anticipate, prepare for and respond to the consequence of climate change if we do not engage in disaster risk management. It is equally clear how DRR can contribute to sustainable development goals. For example, we cannot eradicate extreme poverty, goal number 1, unless we build disaster resilience. We cannot end hunger, goal number 2, as long as disasters continue to inflict large damages to agricultural production. And we cannot promote sustainable and inclusive economic growth, goal number 8, if we do not invest in DRR and make sure the economic growth and the people are risk-informed with respect to hazards of various kinds. To emphasize these interlinkages between DRR and other global agendas, the topic of next year's global platform will be Resilience Dividend towards sustainable and inclusive societies. This title reflects the recognition that DRR pays enormous dividends in the creating resilient and sustainable societies. We should not consider DRR measures as just costs, but as investments in the security of our societies. Accordingly, the various sessions and high-level dialogues will focus on the progress made in risk-informed public and private investments, as well as in various forms of integrated action in disaster and climate risk, including integrated national policies, strategies, planning, and I would argue most importantly, implementation. The topics in Geneva are closely linked to the focus of the discussions here in Rome. This is not a coincidence. The outcomes of the regional platforms will feed into the global platform and from there into the high-level political forum on sustainable development at the UN General Assembly and the General Secretary Climate Summit in 2019. We therefore want to reiterate our gratitude to the Italian government and UNICR for organizing this important regional platform, which provided space for discussion, identified gaps and brought up recommendations to the global DRR and also the exchange of a lot of business cards. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you very much for your attention, and we are very happy and looking forward to welcome you next year in Geneva. Thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Grazie. Grazie molte.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brem. I'd like to invite another dear friend, Anna Freitag, representative of Civil Protection of Portugal, that will have the presidency of the European Forum in 2019. I leave the floor to her.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the year of 2017 for Portugal has been very difficult. Portugal has experienced not one, but two major tragic events related to forest fires. Too many lives were lost, more than 100. But what you may not all know is that immediately after these tragic events, the Portuguese government brought to the top of the political agenda key issues like disaster risk reduction, climate change, community awareness and resilience, prevention and preparedness measures. Therefore, and because disaster risk reduction became a national and a political priority for the Portuguese government, on behalf of the Minister of Internal Affairs, I have the honor to announce that Portugal will be hosting the next European Forum in 2020. I really hope that we can cope with this excellent work that is being done here. I thank Agostino, and I really hope that you can pass me the report with all the lessons learned from these last 2 years of experience. Also looking at Paola from EFDRR and Nacira from DG ECHO and Giovanna from the Council of Europe, Europa Agreement, I must say that I already feel at home, and therefore I am very delightful to have the opportunity, me and my team, to work with you for the next 2 years. How lucky I am and how lucky we are. And for you, well, I hope to see you there, and I hope you all can come to Lisbon, and we still don't know if it will be in Lisbon or in other Portuguese city, but I do count with your presence there. Thank you very much.
Grazie Anna.
Thank you, Anna.
All the information that you need. Allora, grazie.
Thank you. It is a great honor for me to leave the floor to Honorable Del Re for the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Parlerò in italiano, avendo prima...
I will speak in Italian. I prefer to speak in my own language for these final remarks. I'd like to thank the Civil Protection Department, that is really a feather in the hat of our country, for organizing today's forum and for inviting me. I'd like to really thank the important Office of the United Nations for the Disaster Risk Reduction for their support. First of all, I'd like to express how happy I am to see such a varied audience, public and private actors, government, local governments, civil protection entities, non-governmental organizations, universities, and members of the scientific community. So many different actors that work together for a common goal, strengthening the policies for disaster risk reduction in favor of all of us. In the final document we just approved, I see a leitmotif that connects the various points that we stressed as urgent and important, that are important for at every level of government, from international organizations to national governments to local bodies. Every one of us has the responsibility to make decisions, make political decisions, and implement coherent interventions to prevent risks, environmental risks and anthropic risks. As Mr. Giuseppe Conte said yesterday, I'm thinking in particular about obsolescence and the deterioration of the materials used for infrastructures. And I'm thinking about the tragedy of the Morandi Bridge in Genoa that happened a few months ago. It is clear for all of us that at every governmental level we can make different decisions. The local level will be in charge of resilience, of the awareness among citizens on the risks and on sustainability. And investments on structures and infrastructures built according to criteria of awareness of risks. At the national level, we must face difficult challenges such as implementing infrastructures which are adequate for the new conditions that climate change provoke in our country. We must carry out interventions for necessary networks in order to ensure the everyday life of our citizens. It is fundamental that every country elaborates investment plans to develop technologies, starting from the ones we already have, in order to identify the ones we might need in the next future. This to provide a sound basis for knowledge, for exchange of data, which is necessary to support adequate governmental actions and the investment of public and private resources. On this point, I support what was expressed by Ms. Mami Mizutori yesterday morning, opening the forum. Public and private sector must work hand in hand in order to mobilize resources, sufficient resources in the sector of smart building of critical infrastructures in order to develop a sustainable finance system. At an international level, we should expect an increase in the commitment in order to ensure coherence in the implementation of the Sendai framework together with other national strategies which are strictly connected to it. I'm talking about the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate, and the New Urban Agenda. The European Union will be able to implement to carry out investments in order to support international and national policies which will be necessary in order to face the effects of climate change and to reduce the risk levels accumulated in the past in our countries. The United Nations and the agencies that are part of it are called to ensure a constant monitoring and an exchange of data and information, especially on best practices, on technologies and the technologies used, on cost benefits approach of environmental decisions in all countries, to launch and assist cooperation projects in terms of scientific technology in every country of the world in order to exchange information and support each other. All of this adds to the need to intensify efforts in the international cooperation to accelerate the transformation processes in our economies, in particular from the energy point of view. That only if carried out together globally can give the necessary results, namely the reduction of the emissions of CO2 in the atmosphere in order to keep the global warming below 2 degrees. Every one of us will promote this renewed awareness of the topics we discussed here in Roma. I firmly believe that this renewed awareness will help all our country to have a new approach on climate change based on the full awareness of the effects of such events of climate change on our everyday lives. I salute an approach that gives us an international approach in order to have hope for the future in this local and global challenge in favor of all our citizens in every country of the world. Finally, as responsible of international cooperation, please let me say that Italy, in the sector of disaster risk reduction, carries out an important work, not only in Italy, but also internationally, both with emergency interventions supporting populations affected by catastrophes and other kinds of interventions aimed at strengthening resilience in partner countries. Emergency actions are carried out giving fundings for agencies that are active on the field in order to give aid to the populations affected to catastrophes. In some cases, the Italian cooperation responds to the requests of assistance of affected countries with the sending humanitarian aids, for example, medicines, civil protection resources, first help center of the United Nations that is here in Italy, in Brindisi, which is a very important hub. The Italian cooperation supports the humanitarian action carried out by other international entities like Civil Protection, the Italian Red Cross, our firefighters, and our NGOs in Italy. I will just make an example, a recent virtuous case of a response of Italy in an emergency situation. This is an efficient combination of mechanisms. The seaquake and earthquake that occurred in the last September in the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia. In the aftermath of the tragedy, apart from giving a contribution, a monetary contribution to the local Red Cross, after a request of the Red Cross, Indonesian Red Cross, we sent our Italian Red Cross there, and they carried tools to build a base camp, a humanitarian base camp that hosts tens of assistance for the people. We must reinforce preparedness and prevention for disasters. We must go from a reaction culture to a prevention culture. As our Prime Minister, Mr. Conte, said in the opening ceremony, this is the main feature of the action of the Italian government in the disaster risk reduction that carried out a national plan for hydrogeologic risks and carries out activities, awareness activities for the civil society in order to build a culture of risk, engaging the National Civil Service and thanks to the collaboration with the Ministry of Education. It also engages schools. Of course, schools are fundamental to build such culture. I am concluding now. I'd like to thank once again all of the people who took part in the forum. They showed how important and fruitful it is to share information, ideas, and best practices to work together in an increasingly coordinated and efficient way. I am sure that the new synergies that will result of this event will produce innovative ideas in order to implement the commitments of Sendai in 2015 in order to have a new approach, a multi-sectoral approach, with the ambition that the disaster risk reduction will be part of the concept of human security. A responsibility of every one of us. Thank you all.
Bene.
Thank you. Thank you all. Now it is my turn to thank everyone, and please allow me to say just a few words. As moderator of this final closing session, I am very glad for what I've seen in these days, what I've heard, and because I share with you the words that many people said to me in an extraordinary event, quite unusual actually. We saw many comments, very technical, direct comments, probably less diplomatic, but anyway, representing common problems. I'm a veteran of this sector, so I really share these remarks. I would like to thank all those who have cooperated. I continue the thank the others. Thank you to the interpreters who were fantastic. Thank you to the team, Confindustria team, that allowed us to use this space, this very fantastic location. Thank you, Paola, and your team for what you've done. And of course, I cannot avoid thanking the extraordinary team of the Civil Protection Department, who allowed all this to happen. Thank you very much. It was a big success, and now I am very reassured after this event. I announce the official closing of the 7th European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction together with UN ISDR. See you in Geneva. Thank you all.